Hello everybody, it's DDK here, and we're back with some Quake Jewell theory. Well, I say back, this is the first time I've ever made a video on theory for Quake Jewell, but this will be with the aim of helping anyone who's new to the game, anyone who is trying to improve at any level in Jewell, maybe get something extra, get some insights, maybe help you improve. That's the goal. So if we just get started, what makes us win a Jewell? That is if we're going to start right at the top, that is the fundamental question you got to ask yourself. And what I want to do is break everything down right from the top, and then put it all back together again. And if we can develop an understanding for all the composite parts of what Jewell actually is and what your options are like, then it's going to help you build an understanding of what and build the ability to read the game better. So starting right at the top, what is a Jewell basically? It's two things. It's execution. It's what do you do with the mouse and the keyboard, the movement and the aiming and stuff like that. And it is decision making, which is the thinking aspect of the game. So if we examine these areas, because we want to basically be the most efficient we can be in how we focus our efforts here for the sake of improving, like where should we put our analysis. And if we look at execution, there are inherent issues here, because execution isn't something you can really base your thought process around, because the problem with execution is that it's inherently inconsistent. So because of that fact and the inherent inconsistencies or unreliability of execution, in that you won't hit the same percentages every game, you won't hit the same like you're going to miss a rocket jump here or there, you're going to miss a trick jump here or there. Like, that inconsistency is not a good basis for making good decisions, or sorry, it's not a basis for improving, because no matter how much you play, there's always going to be those inconsistencies. You can never guarantee yourself you're going to hit 2 rails in a row. Sure, it can be likely, but it's much better and much more reliable if we look at decision making, because decision making is a process in which you can basically quantify everything. Like, you can quantify, you can get a value for the weapons, the positioning. You can get a value for the armor, the stacks, the element of surprise has a value. All these things have certain values, and you can quantify these things and basically put that into your decision making, and that's a much more consistent way to play the game than relying solely on execution. So if we look at the 3 states of Jewell and basically analyze the bigger picture just to begin with, and I'll just introduce these 3 states. We have in control, out of control, and contested control. So anytime a Jewell is being played, it's going to be in one of these 3 phases basically. So in control is when your stack is so significantly overpowering that the opponent cannot challenge any of the items that you choose to be at to take, because he will die. Unless he wants to die, then he can't challenge you because your stack is so good. So out of control, your stack is so poor that, of course, again, you can't challenge for any of the items that the in control player chooses to take, and you must basically react. You're very reactive when you're the out of control player, because you have to basically play around the guy who is in control. You've got to read his movements in the game, and where he moves dictates where you're going to be, because you can't be where he is, basically. That you always need escape options. So in the third state the game can be in is contested control, and that's when stuff is more even. It doesn't have to be like even. So if we have like one player with a huge stack, one player with less of a stack, we've got like the lesser stack player hitting a rail, so the guy's stack goes down a bit, then the lesser stack player picks up a yellow, and all of a sudden it's getting closer now. And all you need is an efficient engagement, or it's a certain level of an efficient engagement, like a really efficient engagement, or only a slightly favourable engagement where you can get just the first shot off or whatever, to basically even out. And that contested control period of the game is where we see the most interesting decisions, because there's so many more options than the other 2 stages of the game. So, as I have noted down here, as a player you must quickly recognize when the state shifts, which can happen whenever damage is dealt or more armor or health is picked up. You must then understand how it changes your options. So that's what we just discussed, and I have a little example here. to illustrate further what I mean. So, on the map ZTN21, the opponent has 125 health, 200 points of armor, and you have 100 health and 50 armor. You're at the grenade bridge and rail him as he moves below you to the teleporter, and rail him again as he comes down to the teleporter and receive no damage in the process. So then, if we assume that he does not pick up the 25, that it was at the next to the rail, we can just assume that for the sake of this example, you've dealt 160 raw damage to him. Now you know that he was running the megas and the reds and stuff like that, so you know he's stacked, you know he's got like pretty much 200 armor, and you've only been able to scrape away at a yellow. So your guess is that he's pretty darn stacked right now, and at least there's 200 armor. So if you hit 160 damage, that's really nice. So, but how does this change things? Does it change things? So you've hit both of those rails, and you can never know exactly what health and armor he's on. Of course, we can never exactly know. It's always got to be a guess and an estimate, and it's something you got to get good at estimating. And basically, not only have you hit this damage, but he's also in a choke point. So you have to consider the value of the positioning to and apply that to also the situation of the stacks. So you've done 160 damage and you have better position, so you're probably guaranteed at least another rail, probably. If he pushes his way through, you're probably guaranteed another rail. And so what happens here is, if he wants to go further and basically buy himself, using the stack that he has, stack advantage, buy himself a better position by moving through this horrible choke point and taking damage, that's what he pays for with his stack. If he wants to do that, then that's fine, but then it's a risky decision, because basically, sure, the red armor is up, but he's in an open and exposed position, and now you're on even stacks pretty much, and you have the ability to escape more so than he does, should you get low. So it becomes a risky play for him, and you have to understand that you can actually stick around there. That's the thing. You have to understand that you can basically shoot a rail at him if he tries to come through, but if you miss the rail, you can back off. And if you miss the rail, that's great for him, because he can get the red and perpetuate his control. But you did do a lot of damage, and you have a red time stuff, so there is merit, there's stuff for you to take away from that. But let's say you only hit one rail. So you hit one rail, and he comes through the... let's say you hit the rail as he came through the teleporter. So basically, you hit the rail as he came through the teleporter, meaning that he can't just jump straight through. So you have maybe another guaranteed rail on him, or not necessarily guaranteed, but very likely. And your angle is so good that it's much harder for him to hit you than it is for you to hit him. So the damage for you is more likely, like the damage onto him is more likely. However, now we have to have a different consideration in mind, because his stack is actually so overwhelming that he can take a really hugely inefficient engagement, and he can use that massive stack advantage to buy himself a new red and buy himself position. Unless you hit like 3 rails in a row or 4 rails in a row, and he basically like misses everything or something, that's like what it has to take basically for him to die or not get the red in that spot. Then basically that's it. So we can see that all of a sudden it's now a very favourable play for him to go and push onto the red and buy himself that red with the stack that he's going to lose from his terrible position. So and you need to be thinking about escape options now, because you're still out of control. Your control is not contested. The state hasn't really shifted because you only hit one rail, so you have to leave. And to touch on another point quickly, on ZTN, there is a very familiar situation where if you have a player that's out of control and a player that's in control, we've already decided that the player who is in control basically has his pick of items. He can pick any item he wants. There's so many items he can choose, and if he can read your movements well, he can really deny you a lot of stuff. So let's look at a situation where you try to surprise him by hiding it on some angle and waiting for him to appear to take an item and then rail him. Let's say you take the shot and you miss, which is a very familiar situation. What I see a lot of players doing is they stick around and they try to shoot again because they want that rail on him. Now this becomes a risky situation, and it's fine to do it, but you have to understand the risks at play. So if you take that second shot, the first shot was with surprise, so you're guaranteed the first shot, and then you can leave before he has time to react and shoot you. So that's great. But if you miss and you're like, okay, I want to shoot because I want the damage, then if you take a rail, and let's say you trade rails, which is the best scenario then, is that you trade damage, it is completely fine for him because he can stack up on armor much more easily than you can. He's basically, by him hitting you with a rail, he's set you back like a minute or something to having any hope on getting a major item. He set you back like massively, at least a minute, by hitting you with that rail. Had you just left though, you don't lose a minute in having such a shitty stack that you have to run around and try to avoid him really hardcore. Maybe you can get like hit the rail or miss the rail and get another yellow, and then you can try, slowly your options change. But if you get set back that far, it affects you much more than it does him to trade rails. So I just wanted to make that point because I see a lot of people making that mistake. Okay, so we've looked at the 3 states of Jewell. Let's look at the most important principles and stuff to consider and stuff like that. So I may have missed some stuff here, but I wanted to not ram you too much with information. And so here we have the most important principles, or at least the most important 3 principles in dueling that I think are immediately of our concern. So the first thing at the top is efficient engagements, and it's really important to understand efficient engagements because efficient engagements is something you can always ask yourself about. If you ever took a fight at any point, you can analyze whether or not it was an efficient fight for you, and if it was an inefficient fight for you, was that okay? Because there are some situations where taking an inefficient fight, as we talked about before, is okay. If you're in control and you've got a big stack advantage, you can pay some of your stack to get a kill, because sometimes that is what it takes to win the game. Sometimes that's a great decision to make, and that inefficient engagement is completely fine in that case. But there's a lot of times when maybe you took an engagement that was just plain horrendous for you. And you have to understand when those situations are so that you can minimize them and so that you can build on making better engagements for yourself in the future. So to basically break everything down into little parts, we've got things to consider when we're thinking about making efficient engagements. So we've got weapons, of course. So let's just say, the rocket launcher. This is something we need to be thinking about when we're like in a game. Like, how does the rocket launcher affect my options? So what's the rocket launcher good at? So that's what we have to ask ourselves. And it's good at choke points. It's good at close range fighting. It's good at long range spam, stuff like that. But it's not really good at fighting with long range. You don't want to do a rocket versus a rail fight, long range or anything. Mid range, it's unreliable, very unreliable. So it's good when you're baiting items and stuff. Like, that's good. If we take the situation where on ZTN again, the guy's coming through the teleporter. Let's say he's running through that corridor and you're hiding at the shotgun with a rocket launcher and he has no idea you're there. You get an amazing engagement there because not only do you get a free shot, the shot is going to be on average providing much more damage than maybe normal because he has nowhere to move. He's in a little corridor, he's in this choke point, and the rocket launcher is great there. You're going to probably definitely hit, you're probably going to hit with quite a high likelihood the second shot because he's in such a close confined space, and that's what the rocket's good at. So the shaft is great at situations where the player is in the air. It's great at situations where the player is so for example, when the player's in the air, let's say on Furious Heights, when the player comes through the teleporter at the rocket launcher and spawns next to the mega, jumps across to the mega, you can hit like insane amounts of damage when if you're underneath them with a shaft. It's good at close range engagements. It's good at mid range engagements. It's very versatile, much more than it used to be back in the OSP days, and it's generally a very good weapon, especially if you get the surprise. We have the railgun. It's of course not so good at close range. If you miss a shot at close range with rail, that has really huge implications. You can take a lot of damage without dealing much back. But however, mid and long range, it's really good. It's good if you want to basically try and play the war of attrition and try to just like pick away at your opponent. It's good if you're out control and you don't want to go close to an opponent. So you got to think about all the weapons. Like of course we can talk about the other ones like shotguns, really good close range, and blah blah blah. So So we've got positioning. Positioning is a really huge, maybe one of the biggest elements in Jewell, and I don't want to simplify it too much, and I'll go into it again after going through this list. As you can see on the little document I have written up. So positioning is really important, and it always comes into every single decision. For example, I mean, all of these elements are synergistic, they tie in together, so the position can affect how efficient or not your fight with the rocket will be. The positioning will affect like where you want to stand to get the most out of every weapon. Basically, there's just so many ways positioning is important here. The element of surprise, of course. The element of surprise is a great way to start or create an efficient engagement, and it's a way to really get yourself back in the game, because the element of surprise usually means that you're getting the first shot off, and if you're getting the first shot off and getting maybe like a guaranteed rocket or something, or a guaranteed rail, or guaranteed like 80 damage, 50 damage, 60 damage with the shaft, that's really good for you, because not only are you getting free damage, if the opponent didn't expect you to be there, he's going to be taking more damage because he has to get his bearings, switch to the right weapon maybe, and turn around, and it's a horrible thing for him. So element of surprise is not to be undervalued in your considerations. Stacks always come into the considerations, because you have to realize whether or not the type of engagement you want to pick is so efficient enough that it's going to basically help you change the stack difference from like this to this, basically, because if it's not going to do that, and the stack difference is so huge, then the fight is just going to end up with you dying. So even if it's you got the element of surprise, and you got the right weapon and the right positioning and stuff, if the stacks are just so overwhelming, and you'll just die. So you have to understand how efficient or not the engagement will be, how much damage you're going to net in that situation, whether it's enough to be to be something that's actually going to be worthwhile. Which does bring me on to another thing I need to talk about, but which I haven't written down, but hopefully I won't forget that by the time I get to the end. So items that are spawning. So items that are spawning is a really interesting one, because it's not directly about the engagement itself. It's about what's happening during the engagement. So for example, this is an example that has happened many times in a duel. I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this. So you know that the red armor is spawning soon, and a fight happens at the grenade deck. Now the interesting thing here is that it's often a great option for you to move yourself towards a spot in which you can actually, in the middle of a fight, rocket jump. As soon as like the guy takes cover, you rocket jump up to the red spot, and that changes the engagement completely, because that's actually something that you can go into the engagement with knowing, and so you can factor it in, and as soon as you get a tiny opening to do that rocket jump to get that red, that can change everything, and you can go into the fight thinking about that, so you can set it up for yourself. So that's like items that are spawning. The other thing that's maybe less harder to know is whether or not an item is spawning. I mean, let's say you're not sure whether an item is spawning or not, but if you have a general time of the items, what you can do with engagements is you can take an engagement and use that engagement to reposition yourself and reposition the opponent, so that you get position on the item as it's spawning, and you can use it to waste time. So for example, another thing is, in this example with the grenade deck, if there's a fight on the grenade deck in ZTN, there are some situations where maybe red and mega are spawning, and you decide that you don't want to rocket jump up to red because the situation's looking a bit poor. So what you can do is then you can jump back down and position yourself onto the mega, and because the mega is going to be up in like a few seconds, all you've had to do with that engagement is buy yourself some time. And what ends up happening is basically it's not as direct as what we're talking about with an efficient engagement, because what we're thinking about here with efficient engagements is getting a net gain in damage, right? So basically the stacks shift much more in your favor, so you can take control, because we're always aiming to take control, right? But what happens here is that you don't get a net gain in damage necessarily, but what you do is get a net gain in resources. So you jump down, and you basically waste time. You do a bit of damage, and then you're able to take the mega, and you use that engagement to get an item. So it's a bit more of an advanced concept, but basically it's something that again can basically make the engagement that you took. It doesn't look efficient, but when you actually get the item by using it to force positioning on the opponent, then it is then an efficient engagement. So it's all about trying to push yourself into that position of getting control. Let's see. So we've got escape options. So escape options are really important for when you're not sure about an engagement. And this is especially true when you're out of control and you're not certain what the enemy movements are like. You need to always leave yourself with options to escape. And I'll use this opportunity to talk about death in Jewell, because on the majority of maps, I mean, this differs depending on the map, but on all maps apart from maps like Aerowalk and anything like Aerowalk, anything that's really got a very small enclosed, a very small map basically. Any map that's really small with all the big items next to each other, like Aerowalk, death is much different on that map because you can trade damage so much quicker off the spawn than you can on other maps. So if we look at a map like ZTN or DM13 or maps like this, when you kill someone, all of a sudden there's so much armor and health on the map that you can just keep running that constantly. You can just keep running and running that. So when you die, it's really bad because your position off of the spawn is so much worse than it is sometimes in Aerowalk. Although Aerowalk can be quite nasty if you're playing a really good opponent who knows how to play the spawns and how to force your spawns and stuff. But if we're thinking about ZTN for a moment, if you don't die, there's always an opportunity for you to get an armor basically. Dying is never favourable because you can always get yourself an armor. Just keep running around outside of his control, trying to deal damage and not getting caught. Be wary of your escape options, and eventually you can get an armor. So if you're a beginner trying to figure out what to do on a map like ZTN or DM13 or any map that has a lot of armor and health and stuff like that, and is not a small map like Aerowalk, you want to be making sure that you don't die. That's the first thing. You don't need to worry about anything else. First, get the not dying thing down, because as soon as you start dying, you're playing it wrong basically. And once you get good at not dying, once you get good at escape options and stuff like that, and you're good at not dying against the level of opponents you're playing, the next step is figuring out how to deal damage to them and do increasingly more damage to them whilst you're out of control and still not die. And that's the hard part. That's the hard part. And anyway, moving on. I've got positioning as a next important principle. So positioning is a very interesting factor in Jewell. There's lots of ways you can use positioning. DM13 is a really interesting map when we're thinking about positioning, because it really demonstrates how you can control the opponent's movement with positioning, and it's a really elaborate example because I'm sure there's been a lot of situations where you've seen someone who is trapped at the shaft yellow, and if they're trapped at the shaft yellow, you'll probably see the opponent. He'll probably start leaving items up, and the mega could spawn, the red could spawn, the other yellow could spawn. Like, he's going to be leaving these items up sometimes because what he wants to do is he's carefully controlling the escape path, the options, the angles of the opponent, so that he can actually get every item and continue perpetuating his control and continuing his pressure and dealing damage. And that controlling of the spaces is what positioning is about. And this is, of course, a much more advanced thing to actually start doing in a game, but it's something to look out for. It is something that you can use to mitigate the stack advantage. So let's say let's take an example here. Let's say DM6. On DM6, you're out of control and you are in a position where you're on the bridge, the bridge next to the rocket launcher, and the opponent is, like, the red armor is spawning soon, and you know that the opponent's going to be coming to the red armor. Like, he's not going to be using the jump pad. Like, let's say he's already below you near the plasma area, and he's going to be standing on the red very soon because it's spawning. So in this situation, you can have like a really bad stack. You can have a really bad stack and stand there, and you basically take an engagement. And it's because you have the escape option of basically that position gives you an escape option. And the only way he can catch up to you to kill you or finish you off is by basically rocket jumping up. So you have to know whether or not he's willing to rocket jump up, because if he does rocket jump up, he's going to potentially take a lot of damage. So it's something that you have to judge and you have to weigh up. But what you can do is you have to think about the angle of attack that he has onto you and how this mitigates the damage that he's dealing to you, because it's something that you can control. If he's using a shaft or a rail or something, you're making the angle really hard for him. Like he's having to shoot up like this at the bridge, and if you're on the bridge you can always duck back off the edge if you need to. So it's an opportunity for you to deal a lot of damage, and it's a great spot to be in if an opponent is finding himself with a lot of control on the map. It's a good way for you to deal with it. That's a good position to try and play with. So that's another way that positioning is useful. Positioning is also useful in capitalizing on the strength of your loadout against the opponent's loadout. For example, at DM13, again, another good example here is, or Lost World, sorry, if you're not familiar with the older names. On Lost World, there is a really important principle as far as the weapons go, because if we think about the strengths of weapons, which we talked about before, and efficient engagements, we'll think about the shaft and the nature of the middle area. The middle area is really open, really open, and so basically the shaft is king in the middle area. If you do not have a shaft, you can't go into the middle area if your opponent has a shaft, because you'll do so much damage to you, and there's no way you can return the level of DPS that he can deal with the shaft versus your rocket or whatever on mid-range. You just can't keep up with it. So if you're in a position where you've killed someone on DM13, or rather, let's say that they killed you on DM13 and you don't have a shaft, maybe you could get a rocket or something, but you have no shaft, and you know for a fact that they have a shaft. If they're playing the middle positions and stuff, you just cannot go there. You just can't. And that's a positioning thing. It's taking advantage of the strength of your weapon, and that's a way of using positioning to the weapon's strength to stop certain options of the opponent. And you have to recognize this, because if you don't take advantage of it, then the opponent's going to get a lot of stuff that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. Also, not only, this is a psychology element, not only can we think about the fact that he can't, if you're sitting in the middle of the map with a shaft and he doesn't have one, that he can't engage you. That's something you now know about him. You know that he knows that he can't go into the middle area, so it starts to play on you understanding how he chooses to move around the map, because of how what you have affects him. So the positioning, there's a lot more, I'm sure, but I don't want to go too crazy. This video's already been very long. So item control is another important principle, because we've talked about a lot about how the kind of contested part, like the contested control part of the game and the out of control part of the game with the efficient engagements and positioning and stuff like that. But item control is something, of course, that is more of a consideration for the guy who's trying to run control or who is in control. So what have I written here? I've written controlling items effectively requires item timing, whether you like it or not. It's pretty fair, I think. One method for beginners that is often also employed at the top level is to only time the mega and run the armors by a pattern. So how does this work? So we have to time items. It's just something you have to just get over and get used to. I know a lot of people are kind of annoyed by it, but you can make it easier by yourself by just timing the mega, and there's a couple reasons for this. The first reason is that the mega is the only item that spawns on 35. Well, all health spawns on 35-second intervals, but the mega is the only important item that spawns on 35-second intervals, which means that if you choose just to time the mega health, then you can run the armors via a pattern, because if you take the red armor then the yellow armor, it's always going to spawn in the same order, as long as you're taking them in the right order. So you take the red and then you take the yellow. The red is going to spawn and then the yellow is going to spawn. Like, between the time of the distance it took for you to travel between them, that's the interval of how they will spawn. So that's always going to be the case. So on a map like ZTN, you only need to know when the mega is, because everything else you can run on a pattern. So that's fine. I mean, that is a completely fine way to play the game, and there's a lot of top players that play like that. So that's one reason. And the other reason is that the mega is often the item that makes the most difference when we're thinking about the armors and the health and the mega. The mega is going to make more of a difference than the armors will, because of the way the damage ratios work, and the damage ratio is like 1 to 2 with the armor. So the mega is going to give you a little bit more of an edge sometimes, not always, but it's definitely a more preferable item to have than having like 200 armor and 100 health. You'd prefer to have like 200 health and 100 armor. So let's see. So that's the reasons why that method can work, and why you should probably do that method. If you're kind of skeptical about using timing, just do that. So all these concepts are synergistic, and they all come into considerations together when you're looking at any fight, when you're analyzing any demo, when you're watching yourself play, when you're watching your opponents play, when you're trying to read the game. All of these things come together, and you've got to figure out how they affect the fights, and so that helps you to make better decisions in the future. So at the end I've put let's revisit the 3 states with these principles in mind. So okay, so what I'll do is I'll give you an overview of how you want to play each of the phases of the game. So we've got the 3 states, and when you're in control, this is the state, this is where you want to be the entire game. And the reason is because the more health and armor you take, the more you can make errors, basically, the more damage you can take, before you'll die. So that means the opponent has to deal more damage than you in every engagement to kill you and to win. So whoever has the most resources is most likely to win. That's common sense, I think. So out of control is the situation where basically like you have to whittle away the opponent. And it is by far the most difficult position to play, because you have to not die, and every time you die the situation gets a little bit worse, and you're going to have to make good use of traps and efficient engagements, and you're going to have to take risks, because if the opponent has more resources than you just have to take risks and hope that the risk pays off. There's always going to be risks when you're trying to set up a trap, or when you're trying to basically stick your neck out there when you have less health, armor, or weapons. There's always going to be a bit of a risk there. You're always going to be a bit of an underdog. That's the whole point. So, in contested control, I guess there's not much I can say that I have not already said. So I hope that I broke these concepts down enough, and I hope that I didn't go too crazy with this, because I tend to rant a bit. So I hope this helped people, and let me know if you like this or want anything more like this. I've been thinking about running a kind of like a weekly show where I look at the demos of people who send demos in, and I go through the situations with all this stuff in mind, and hopefully I can try and help to analyze where people can improve, analyze where they maybe took an efficient engagement or where they didn't, and how it changed the game, and so on and so forth. So if there is interest for anything more like this, like me ranting about theory, then let me know, and I'll do my best to make it happen. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it, and catch you guys later.